Russia didn't plan to fight Croatia. That's the mistake, because in 2026, Croatia isn't becoming dangerous by threatening Russia. It's becoming dangerous by removing the one thing Russian strategy depends on: control of time. And once that control slips, the war stops being manageable. Wars don't just punish enemies, they punish assumptions. For Moscow, Croatia belonged in a familiar box, a small Balkan NATO member with limited reach, loud domestic politics, a military shaped more by legacy than projection, not a frontline state, not a logistical hub, not a country capable of shifting outcomes beyond its borders. When Russia looked west, it looked past Zagreb. From a planning perspective, Croatia appeared manageable by default, present but peripheral, aligned but not decisive, a country that followed rather than shaped events. That assumption held until the war in Ukraine began to expose how modern conflicts actually work. By 2026, Croatia has become something Russia didn't account for, a state that quietly repositioned itself inside the systems of the war rather than its spectacle. No threats, no red lines, no dramatic deployments designed for headlines. Instead, Croatia embedded itself where wars are won or lost after the cameras leave. Logistics, sustainment, production, and alliance reliability. And Russia didn't fully register how far that embedding went until reversing it became costly. The danger here isn't Croatian firepower, it's Croatia's placement inside a machine Russia is already struggling to keep up with. Modern wars aren't decided only where soldiers meet. They're shaped behind the scenes in places most people never think about. Ammunition stocks that don't run dry, transport routes that stay open even when pressure rises, political systems that don't freeze when decisions get uncomfortable. This is where Croatia matters. Since 2022, Croatia has developed a reputation inside NATO as a country that doesn't stall. Aid packages move when approved. Equipment transfers follow through. Funding aligns with alliance frameworks rather than improvised gestures designed for domestic applause. There are no last-minute reversals, no drawn-out delays that signal doubt, no dramatic brinkmanship that invites pressure. From Russia's perspective, that consistency is dangerous. Because pressure strategies don't rely on confrontation alone. They rely on friction, on hesitation, on the expectation that political noise eventually slows operational reality. Croatia has become a place where that expectation fails. Even when domestic debates exist, the machinery keeps moving. Decisions translate into action. And once that behavior becomes routine, Moscow loses one of its most valuable tools: time. One of Croatia's most effective moves didn't involve unveiling a new weapon. It involved letting go of the old. Rather than clinging to aging Yugoslav-era tanks and infantry fighting vehicles as symbols of sovereignty, Zagreb treated them as leverage. Those platforms exited Croatian service and moved through coordinated arrangements with Germany into Ukraine. On the surface, this looked modest. In reality, it created a loop Russia deeply dislikes. Those vehicles now appear where Russia least wants them, contributing to pressure on the battlefield. Croatia, meanwhile, receives financial backfill, training pathways, and access to modern NATO standard systems that lock its forces deeper into Western military ecosystems. New artillery replaces old. New armor replaces legacy platforms. New logistics pipelines replace isolation. Russia faces losses at the front. Croatia upgrades at the rear. The alliance tightens. No escalation headlines, no thresholds crossed, just a quiet exchange that compounds over time. This is the kind of move that doesn't trigger alarms but steadily changes the balance underneath them. Inside NATO, raw numbers matter less than reliability. Large militaries that hesitate create gaps. Smaller militaries that show up on time close them. Croatia has moved firmly into the second category. It meets spending commitments. It aligns support through alliance mechanisms instead of freelancing. It integrates planning rather than competing for influence or attention. When NATO planners look at Southern Europe, Croatia is no longer an unknown variable. That matters more than most viewers realize. Balkans. Russia has spent years exploiting uncertainty inside Western alliances, energy dependencies, political cycles, internal divisions. Croatia's trajectory works against that model by anchoring itself to processes that don't depend on any single leader, election, or moment of public opinion. There's a deeper reason Croatia is difficult for Russia to deal with, and it has nothing to do with tanks or troop numbers. It's Croatia's size. Large powers expect resistance from large states. They plan for it. They budget for it. They build escalation ladders around it. Small states, meanwhile, are often ignored or pressured quietly. Mid-sized states that integrate deeply are different. Croatia is too small to justify escalation and too embedded to coerce easily. It doesn't present itself as a direct challenger, but it also doesn't sit outside the system where pressure can be applied cheaply. That creates a trap Russia is very familiar with and deeply uncomfortable navigating. If Moscow applies pressure, it risks widening the conflict. If it ignores Croatia, it loses ground inside NATO systems. If it tries to punish Croatia economically or politically, the effect barely registers. That's what makes mid-power integration dangerous. It removes clean options. Croatia doesn't provoke, but it also doesn't bend, and in strategic competition, situations without clean responses are often the most costly. From Moscow's perspective, that makes Croatia harder to influence and harder to peel away quietly. Once predictability replaces ambiguity, leverage starts to disappear. Croatia's geography doesn't threaten Russia directly. It enables something more important. The Adriatic coastline sits well outside Russian strike reach, insulated from the legal and military constraints that define the Black Sea, and embedded in maritime networks NATO already dominates. It functions as strategic depth, a place where logistics can move, ships can dock, equipment can be staged, and planning can happen without constant escalation risk. That distinction matters. Modern conflicts are not decided by who strikes first. They're decided by who can keep operating when pressure becomes routine. Secure rear areas allow alliances to absorb shock, rotate forces, repair equipment, and move supplies without turning every action into a crisis. The Adriatic gives NATO that space. Croatia gives that space structure. Russia can contest the Black Sea. It can disrupt movement there. It can apply pressure and signal dominance, but it cannot do the same in the Adriatic without opening an entirely new strategic front, one that would stretch its already limited options. That asymmetry forces Moscow into acceptance rather than control, and acceptance is not where Russia prefers to operate. The most important shift isn't what Croatia sends, it's what Croatia helps keep running. Croatia is moving beyond one-off donations toward integration into Europe's expanding defense production and sustainment ecosystem. Ammunition manufacturing, industrial cooperation, and supply chain resilience now matter more than individual platforms. This is where Russia struggles most. Wars of attrition are decided long after urgency fades. They're decided when costs rise, attention drifts, and political patience wears thin. The side that can still produce, repair, and replace at scale gains leverage without firing a shot. Croatia's role inside that ecosystem strengthens NATO's ability to sustain pressure, even when the war becomes background noise. From Moscow's perspective, this isn't just support for Ukraine, it's reinforcement of a system designed to outlast shock. The longer that system runs, the harder it becomes to disrupt, and the less effective pressure becomes as a tool. There's another layer to Croatia's growing relevance that rarely shows up in headlines: visibility. Modern power isn't just about what you can hit, it's about what you can see and what others can see with you. Croatia's integration into NATO's intelligence and surveillance networks quietly reduces the space Russia prefers to operate in. The Adriatic isn't a combat zone, it's a monitoring zone. Maritime traffic, logistics flows, and regional movements are observed, shared, and folded into alliance-wide situational awareness. Nothing dramatic, nothing provocative, just fewer blind spots. From Moscow's perspective, that matters. Russia's pressure strategies rely on ambiguity, on acting just below thresholds, on exploiting uncertainty long enough to shape outcomes before responses harden. Every additional set of quiet eyes narrows that window. Croatia doesn't need to challenge Russia directly to matter here. By contributing to awareness rather than confrontation, it helps turn uncertainty into predictability. And predictability is dangerous for strategies built on surprise and hesitation. At first glance, Croatia doesn't always look politically unified. Statements from the presidency have occasionally sounded skeptical. Public debates have questioned escalation, cost, and long-term involvement. From the outside, this can resemble hesitation, and for a time, Moscow likely read it that way. But rhetoric and reality have separated. Defense budgets have risen steadily. Aid packages continue. NATO integration deepens year by year. Equipment transfers don't stall. Military planning aligns more closely with alliance standards, regardless of political noise at the top. That distinction matters. Russia has long relied on the assumption that internal disagreement eventually slows external alignment. Croatia has demonstrated the opposite. Debate exists, but momentum continues. Decisions translate into action even when consensus is imperfect. From Moscow's perspective, that removes a familiar pressure valve. The expectation that time and messaging will soften commitment hasn't materialized. And once a country proves it can absorb political friction without reversing direction, influencing it becomes far more expensive. Croatia doesn't exist in isolation. Its evolution mirrors a broader shift across the Balkans and southeastern Europe. Regions Russia once treated as strategically flexible. Countries that were historically cautious, divided, or economically tied to Moscow are narrowing their ambiguity. Romania has become a logistics and air power anchor on NATO's eastern flank. Greece has modernized its naval and air posture while tightening coordination across the Mediterranean. North Macedonia has aligned firmly despite internal strain. Even states that remain rhetorically cautious are adapting structurally. Croatia fits into this pattern not as the largest military, but as one of the most dependable. Its modernization and alignment help normalize NATO presence and planning across a region Russia traditionally approached through bilateral influence and selective pressure. The more this normalization spreads, the harder it becomes for Moscow to isolate individual states or frame the Balkans as strategically unsettled. What Russia loses here isn't territory, it loses room to maneuver. For decades, Russia treated the Western Balkans as a space of strategic ambiguity. Serbia maintained close political and military ties with Moscow. Energy dependence created leverage. Cultural narratives reinforced alignment. The region as a whole remained fractured enough that influence could be applied selectively without forcing confrontation or committing resources. That gray zone mattered. It allowed Russia to project relevance without escalation, to shape outcomes quietly, to signal power without risking exposure. Croatia's trajectory narrows that space. As Zagreb modernizes, integrates, and embeds itself deeper into NATO frameworks, it shifts the regional baseline. It doesn't confront Serbia directly. It doesn't escalate rhetorically, but it raises the floor of interoperability and preparedness in a way that changes calculations across the region. From Moscow's perspective, this creates a cascading problem. Influence in Serbia becomes harder to maintain when neighboring states are more integrated, more predictable, and less vulnerable to pressure. The cost of sustaining ambiguity rises. The ability to act below the threshold of response diminishes. The gray zone doesn't disappear overnight, it shrinks. And shrinking gray zones are dangerous for strategies built on flexibility rather than force. By 2026, Russia is already operating under strain. Ukraine consumes manpower, material, and political focus. Sanctions constrain industrial recovery. Commitments stretch from Eastern Europe to the Middle East and beyond. Every additional area demanding attention compounds the problem. Croatia adds to that burden in a subtle way, not as a battlefield threat, not as a trigger for escalation, but as a planning constraint, another logistics node NATO doesn't have to worry about, another state that doesn't need reassurance or delay, another environment where assumptions about hesitation fail. Strategic overload doesn't arrive with a single dramatic collapse. It builds through accumulation. Too many small, persistent problems that demand attention without offering resolution. Croatia represents one of those problems, not urgent enough to confront directly, not weak enough to ignore, and not volatile enough to exploit. That combination is deeply uncomfortable for a system already stretched thin. 10 years ago, this story wouldn't have worked. Europe wasn't rearming at scale. Defense production wasn't expanding across borders. Ukraine hadn't exposed the limits of Russia's escalation control. NATO wasn't integrating this deeply. Croatia's moves would have looked symbolic rather than structural. The context changed. The war forced alliances to prioritize endurance over optics, logistics over gestures, reliability over declarations. Croatia adapted faster than Moscow expected, embedding itself into the machinery that now sustains pressure rather than announces it. Once that embedding happens, it becomes difficult to unwind. Sanctions can be adjusted, deployments can rotate, governments can change, but integration, once normalized, becomes the baseline. And baselines shape everything that follows. Russia didn't lose influence in Europe because of one dramatic mistake. It's losing it because environments are changing faster than assumptions. Croatia didn't challenge Russia openly. It didn't issue ultimatums. It didn't draw red lines. It integrated. And integration is one of the hardest forces to reverse in geopolitics. By the time a country becomes inconvenient rather than threatening, the damage is already done. Pressure options narrow. Influence costs rise, control slips quietly without a single headline moment to point to. That's why Croatia matters in 2026. Not as a hammer, not as a frontline shock force, but as a constraint. And in a war where control matters more than spectacle, constraints shape outcomes long before anyone realizes they're there.